Okay, so day 4, and we're moving from radical feminism that we had yesterday on to socialist feminism. Okay, everybody settled? So in the UK context, at the time of second wave feminism, we did have a relatively strong organised left, and that was mainly due to our trade union movement. But as I flagged up in previous days, there was still this issue about antagonisms towards feminism from within the union movement and other left-wing organizations of a socialist nature. We've already noted those antagonisms. I flagged up there Sheila Rowbotham's Promise of a Dream, Remembering the 60s, which was published in 2019. And that, I feel, is an excellent memoir of what it was like in terms of, first of all, encountering socialism in the 60s. And the memoir moves through to take in the 70s and the coming of feminism. And through that memoir, you do get this strong sense of how she experienced those antagonisms, the antipathy of socialist male comrades towards the notion of democratizing daily life. The idea that in socialist households, men and women share the housework. And you might want to think back to Trafford Tansey on day 1 and that whole contest about who gets to do the housework. And when the husband is defeated, what does he want? He wants a rematch, as in there's to be no sharing. And I think that is still an ongoing issue about equality in terms of sharing the work on the domestic front. So it's through the 70s that the notion of democratizing daily life proves pivotal to socialist feminist analysis. That at that time was extending Marx's idea of class exploitation into a more comprehensive analysis, one that could look at both gender and class subordination. At the intersection of class and gender, it was possible then to grasp how working class women's subordination was structured through a system of, on the one hand, capitalist production at work and social reproduction in the home. And again, as previously noted, over time, socialist feminist political theorizing would further extend into interlinkages of class, gender, race, and sexuality. So, against this backdrop, enter our next playwright. Doesn't want to work, hang on. Oh, it's because I've got it upside down, I think. Hang on, no. Doesn't want to work. Let's try this instead. Enter our next playwright, Carol Churchill. So it was in the years of second women's liberation movement and the socialist feminist attentions to class and gender that were gaining traction, coming into theatre, and very principally at that time through the work of Carol Churchill. Now, I had to put Carol Churchill in this session because any discussion of socialist feminist theatre making in UK context has to come back to Churchill. In fact, I'd put it more strongly than that and say that any discussion of feminist theatre in a UK context has to reference Churchill. She is the most pivotal figure of all in terms of establishing and growing a feminist theatre tradition in the UK. She is internationally acclaimed for two things. One is her trenchant political theatre voice, and the other is her capacity to innovate new forms and conventions. And we'll be looking at both of those aspects this afternoon. Because form is something that we keep coming back to, especially where we've worked from realism through the idea of new forms. Well, Churchill, more than any playwright, has innovated various conventions and forms in the contemporary British theatre scene. And as I say, that she's acknowledged for that work, not just nationally, but internationally. She is now in her 80s and is still making some extraordinary work. And actually, in the session tomorrow, I will come back and I will talk in the round table a little bit about her most recent play of all. What's also astonishing is that I can't think of any other playwright, male or female, who is so revered by their peers. It's one thing to sort of garner the attention and acclaim of critics or scholars, but there's no other playwright that has influenced so many others. She's like the goddess to all the kind of, like, across generations. For women especially, she's a pioneering figure because of all the prejudice that we were talking about yesterday against women's work in the theatre, unless it happens to be of the very mainstream conventional form. So because she has been so experimental in her work, that has paved the way for younger generations of women playwrights to be accepted for their experimentation. You know, I remember the playwright April de Angelis saying once, you know, the male critics, they can't keep on saying women can't do structure because, look, there's Carol Churchill. She does these fantastic things with structure. So they can't keep saying it. So she's been this enormous influential and pioneering figure. And she's also, as I say, that influence extends to male playwrights. And Mark Ravenhill, who belonged to the in-your-face generation of the 1990s, the boys, or mostly boys, that came through that route. I was talking about, you know, when I talked about dirty realism, that brigade. He writes for the Guardian newspaper, columns on theatre and other political issues. And there's one time he wrote in a column that he confessed he reads Top Girls at least once a year and weeps. Weeps for the reason, he says, how can I write something as finely crafted and politically on the button as that? So turning to Top Girls, and for this I suggested as a sort of antidote to having to read the other plays, that you might watch the BBC version that you can find on YouTube. So if you're already familiar, I thought, well, that will be a refresher. And if not familiar either with that play or with Churchill at all, it's a kind of, it's a good one to grasp her socialist, feminist commitments. Now, in the UK, Top Girls is now regarded as what we would call a state of the nation play. A state of the nation play that is looking at the huge economic divide in the UK, not just from a feminist perspective, but more broader, broader than that, because that divide has stayed with us and has got worse during the 21st century landscape and is very, very deep at the moment as a divide. Post-COVID, also post the global crash back in the first decade, 2007 to 8 crash. So that divide that we find in the play has got deeper and deeper, and this play retains its relevance as a state of the nation play. It's endlessly revived. It's on the university syllabus, on the curriculum there. It's also on the curriculum in schools. So when you're taking your higher level subjects, it's on the syllabus for that. I think one of the reasons eventually it was so picked up is because it's unusual to have an all-female cast, and that's still the case. For our purposes now, it will help us to reflect on, firstly, the Brechtian influences on socialist feminist theatre making, which we'll come to next. Questions about the future directions for feminism, and then to springboard us into more contemporary works, both by Churchill and some other playwrights, so at least I can flag up a few of our other contemporary feminist playwrights for you. So in the reading you had for today, I included a short extract from Janelle Reinaldt, from the piece about Brecht and feminism, strange bedfellows, question marks. Now, I thought with that extract, first of all, because Janelle in that piece goes over the three feminisms that we've been looking at, so that was a helpful revision point for you. She then looks at the feminist critique of Brecht, because in the kind of Brechtian theatre making, Brecht with his political epic theatre notion was focused on the critique of capitalism, but not gender. Again, we've got that gender blind spot. So on the one hand, you've got kind of at this time various feminist critiques of Brecht, but then also what she comes round to detailing is the way in which this was influential. Ideas, techniques from Brecht are helpful to producing a theatre of resistance. And I've qualified that in terms of Churchill specifically, where I suggest in her case it's producing a theatre of socialist feminist resistance. The extract also includes some reflections by Micheline Wanda, whom we encountered on the first day's reading. There again, noting the way in which, unless you're doing something that's more mainstream, it's difficult to get onto the larger stages. So that applies yesterday to radical feminism, and it certainly applies to socialist feminism today. Her article moves on to identifying and talking through, discussing the conventions and techniques from epic theatre that were picked up in socialist feminist theatre making at this time. So the alienation effect, the social jest, historicisation. And it wasn't sort of taking them necessarily as Brecht would use them, but reworking them, making feminist use of them. Always with a view to, as Janelle writes, alienating, deconstructing the structures of gender. So we can now, with those headlines in mind, we can now actually think of Top Girls and those Brechtian influences. First of all, we could note that we've got a non-linear structure, so we're not back in that classic realism terrain. We've got a non-linear play here. The final act, the scene between the sisters in the kitchen with the daughter Angie present, that is in a mode of domestic realism, but you only get to that after you've gone through this fantastic, surreal dinner party at the start and this non-chronological weaving back to that earlier kitchen scene. So that in itself begins to alienate, if you will, the domestic realism that comes in the final part. And that dinner party at the time was quite extraordinary. And I think some of the reason that the play originally got mixed reviews was because there was this, well, what is it? you know, why are all these strange women from different periods, and some historical and some fictional, why are they all together in this room? And then the break, and it moves into the contemporary moment. So it was a bit about being puzzled, what's going on here? You know, again, coming back to the structural thing, well, this isn't domestic realism, is it? You know, what's actually happening? So there's that kind of historicizing device going on there by mixing these women from these different periods, and whether they're historical, whether they're fictional, in order to produce in that Brechtian way the sense that these are lives that could have been lived differently. It didn't have to be like this. And then you get the links between the past to present, so you can start to feel the historicization of the present, as in these issues that are raised in that dinner party scene, these stories of patriarchal oppression in particular, can be seen also operating in the present. They're not just in the past. We can make those connections. So the past distances from the present. We get that double eye view of it, which is a sort of expression I've come up with, explain in the next slide. We've got double multi-role playing like we've seen in some of the other works. And again, the same matters apply. The practical reasons for doing it, but when you have to do it, then you can make political points out of that. And again, you're breaking that convention of one performer allied to one particular role as per classic realist playing. I think a particular political resonance in the case of Top Girls from the doubling was the decision to double the roles of Dulgret and Angie, who are, if you will, both bottom girls, if I can put it like that. So that you then get that resonance, given that it's the actress that takes on both of those parts. Of course, the one unified figure is Marlene, and to me that makes sense because as the unified figure, she is represented of this neoliberal top girl syndrome. And doing so risks feminism's disconnect to socialism, and say more about that in a moment. And again, the social jest, well, if you think about the dinner scene, and the costumes that would be used for that kind of scene, and a point that it was the feminist critic Ellen Diamond made when she recognized how the costuming demonstrated in the Brechtian sense how this elaborate historical text was covering each woman's body. So if you think about Pope Joan in that dinner scene with all the kind of robes that you would put to kind of emblematize a popish figure, and yet underneath that, what the storytelling, the autobiographical storytelling reveals in that dinner party is the story of, well, this is the woman's body that eventually gives birth and for which the woman is stoned to death in the street. So yes, so this is my when I was going back over this period of Churchill's writing and thinking about the use of these Brechtian techniques, and I was encouraged to summarize it as a form of double eye viewing, in the sense that by working with Brechtian conventions and techniques, it resists a kind of one-eyed view of the world as being unchangeable and fixed, that she always has a way, and not just in the Brechtian period of her writing, but also in her more experimental works in later years, a way of giving us always a double vision. So it's not just about the personal story, it's always about alienating in some way or other the political, the social, the economic, so that we can see those bigger structures always, like we've been saying, with a view to wanting to change them, to inspire us to see the necessity for changing them. I have to acknowledge that the notion of the double eye viewing is one that I didn't actually steal it, I adapted it from Richard Hoggart's analysis of the working class representation in his seminal work back from the mid 20th century, and he was at the time talking about, in class terms, about the difficulty of holding the personal and the political together. So I have to credit him there, because I kind of took it and reworked it for Churchill. But in terms of Churchill's own innovative strategies, the one we should note from Top Girls is the overlapping dialogue. Now, that's become so widely used in British theatre that I think sometimes people forget that actually it was Churchill that pioneered it, to have the overlapping voices. It was something that she'd first tried in an earlier play, a short one, Three More Sleepless Nights, back from 1980. I think it has a particular purpose and effect in the dinner scene, because what you've got in effect are these women almost like talking over each other, which gives the effect of they're not listening most of the time. You can almost see that there are kind of sequences of monologues and they get interrupted. And it's like when one of the women interrupts another one, it's not usually to ask about, oh my goodness, what was happening to you? It's, well, this happened to me. And so it goes on. And you can, it's a little exercise. You can almost like forget the dialogue and almost like extract each of those autobiographical lines. And it's a very hard scene to direct and to play, because what you have to do is get that effect of the women not listening, but at the same time, you've also got to make it really clear to the audience so the audience can tune in. So I think for anyone directing it and for the performers acting it, it's actually very, very challenging to do. So it's kind of almost like a musical composition that you have to pull together. It works in that way. So that's just one example of the way that she's highly innovative in her theatre making. Okay, so to think now about Top Girls, the play, in relation to socialist feminism. And again, drawing on the comment from Chanel Reinel, who observes that whatever the strategies that she's using there, they're those that ground a socialist feminist analysis of the relationship between patriarchy and the economic system. And in Churchill's own words, she recognized, admitted that socialism and feminism are not synonymous, but also stated that she felt strongly about both and wouldn't be interested in a form of one that didn't include the other. So not synonymous, but wanting both, not leaving one or the other out. But I think then, turning to Top Girls, the question the play centrally poses is what happens when feminism loses its socialist dimension. And to bed that thought down, if you think back to the kitchen scene and the showdown between the two sisters, that's a moment that crystallizes what the future will look like from either side of the socialist capitalist divide. And it comes right to the fore in their heated us and them dialectical debate that closes that final act. The word stupendous comes up. For Marlene, top girl Marlene, her vision is of a stupendous time ahead, but that depends on Thatcher's adoption of monetarism, belief in the individual, the demise of what she calls the slimy unions, and the total abjection of the working class. Joyce is no less vitriolic, but from the opposite side of that kitchen table. So she engages in that vitriolic outpouring against capitalism. Her vision for the stupendous future is rooted in working class resistance to exploitation. And there is, I feel, a revolutionary note as Joyce declares, "We'll get you lot off our backs," one that echoes Dolgret at the end of the dinner scene with her kind of revolutionary leading the women peasants out from the gates of hell. However, there is an issue there, a problem there, because the uprising that Joyce forecasts is problematically envisioned in the workers' movement embedded in the trade unions. And I'd argue it's problematic because it's male-dominated. Okay, note the description of the sister's father, a poor agricultural labourer who, while hostile to the bosses walking on the workers' faces, was also the man who drank the money and hit his wife. So it's not straightforward in that way. We've got those antagonisms again within the trade union sphere, but also because the trade unions were shortly to lose all their power. I mean, at the end of the play, Joyce, representative of the working class woman, stands alone. She's unsupported by an unreconstructed, soon to be decimated left-wing labour movement and a feminism losing its collective socialist outlook to its right-wing top girl double. I mean, just a note on the loss of union power, that really goes by the time of the miners' strike in 1984 to 5, which they lost. And that gave Thatcher the power to steamroll through all the unions. And to be honest, the unions have never really recovered from that decimation in the 1980s. Yes, we still have unions, but they're so much weaker than they once were. So in terms of losses, there are dual losses here at the end of the play. The loss of socialist feminist dynamics and the possibility of making the socialist left feminist. And of course, the decade proved stupendous for the maturely enfranchised top girl at the expense of her disadvantaged sisters. And when the play has been revived in subsequent decades, when it gets to that word stupendous, there's always that kind of a feeling in the room, and sometimes laughter, depending on which side of the political divide you sit. To use the word stupendous about the 80s, if you're on the left, it's that moment. So there's always a bit of a frisson when that word comes up, when the play's revived. But of course, the writing was written on the wall of Thatcher's economic policies, her espousal of neoliberal capitalism with its attendant philosophy of the self-empowered individual and diminished state responsibility for the welfare of its citizens. And it's neoliberal capitalism that we are left with. And in the UK, whether the governments have been on the left or the right ever since, none of them have undone neoliberal capitalism, even in its most, what I would call, bankrupt moments. So we're left with this question mark hanging over the linkage between socialism and feminism. But curiously, in the sphere of critical theory, as Rahul Jaggi, writing with Nancy Fraser, has pointed out, sometime in the mid to late 1980s, capitalism pretty much dropped out of the critical theory picture, at least in a Western context. And elsewhere, referring to this period, Fraser more specifically cites capitalism as all but vanished from the agenda of feminist theory, distancing themselves from the sort of large-scale social theorizing associated with Marxism. Feminist theorists relinquished critical attentions to capitalism as, quote, reductive, deterministic, and dépassé. But if that's what was happening in feminist theory at this time, Churchill moves in an opposite way and pushes her critique of capitalism very much center stage, and enduringly so. And I've headlined 3 more productions there coming after Top Girls. Firstly, Fen from 1983, which is a socialist feminist interrogation of agrarian-based Fenland women whose labour is exploited by capitalism. Serious Money, that came in 1987, which is written in verse in a satirical take on the London markets and all the kind of greedy bankers and high-flying women devoted to greed that were coming out in the 80s. And then I included the final one, The Skriker from 1994, which is a collaboration with the dance theatre company Second Stride. And it's based on this mythological creature, the Skriker, whose spirit world is damaged by human greed. And I'm going to show you a clip from that because it's not one you can find on YouTube. It's very short, because I also want to show you this, because it's moving on into the 90s, to start to show you how her work doesn't stay with the Brechtian but keeps evolving and innovating. So I'm going to try this clip now, see if it works. And you have to sort of bear with it, because the footage I have now is very old, so the quality is not the best. And I should say it's footage. It's taken just before the show opened. It was the National Theatre, so it's still it's only kind of semi-costumed, still in the last rehearsal stages. But it includes input from the director and the choreographer, Ian Spink, and one of our, I keep talking about our white male critics. Well, you've got one in here, Benedict Nightingale, so you can get a sense of when I've been talking about the white men behind the theatre scenes and reviewing pages, what I mean. Okay, let's see if I can get this on. Right, it's here and it's not on there. Why not? Right, okay, it might want to. It's the same issues. Yeah. I thought it would just work for that. So this needs to close. Yeah. Actually close. Yeah. Oops. Okay, now try it. Yeah. All right. No, not really.
So this is the video you've copied. Right? It's a file from your.
I mean, it did it for traffic chanting.
Okay.
Duplicate.
Duplicate. That's what we use, is it?
Now it's working. Oh, come on.
Or maybe it's... Come on. Right.
But more recently, Churchill has moved the words away from centre stage in collaborations with Second Stride Dance Company, such as the dance drama The Lives of the Great Poisoners in 1991 and Fugue, a dance piece for television. In her new play, The Skriker, Churchill continues this collaborationship with Second Stride to create an underworld of fairies and spirits from English folklore that is dominated by a chameleon-like creature, the Skriker.
Skriker is a creature from the underworld. It's a creature in, I think, Lancashire folk stories, and in those it's something that can shapeshift, change its shape, and is heard howling in the night, and if it howls near you, it's a death portent.
The Skriker, on the one hand, seems to have endless powers to transform and to manipulate and to control things, yet at the same time has this desperate need to feed off people and to feed off particular people. I think it's the most interesting character that she's ever written.
Driven by a desire to lure one of them away to the underworld, the Skriker, played by Catherine Hunter, appears to two girls in a range of different guises.
To help Lily, so you both want me that
I don't.
much?
No, I don't.
Josie's not frightened.
What do you want?
I want a lot. But so do you. We could both have it.
Have what?
Whatever you like.
Josie, don't do it. When you feel her after you, Josie, remember what you felt. But when you've lost her, you want her back. Because you see what she can do. You've lost your chance, and it could be the only chance ever in my life.
I knew you were desperate. That's how I found you. Are you ready now?
Josie, I wish you wouldn't.
Don't count anymore.
Yes!
This is the first time I've sat down to write a play by myself and ended up actually writing dance into it in the form of writing stage directions, which I knew were for dancers. But it's not a play that was developed after doing a sort of workshop research period like some joint stock plays like Cloud9 or Serious Money. And this one started with as being just a play I was writing by myself. And at some point in working on it, decided that the best way to do it would be to simplify the main action down to just being the Skriker and the two girls. And all the other stories and creatures that I'd had that I was trying to sort of weave into all sorts of plots and events. To do those a different way, to do those by working with dancers and singers.
I think the way Churchill uses language makes her peculiarly sympathetic to dance. In a lot of her works, the language itself has a kind of surface rhythm and music. Anyway, that she's interested in playing with ideas, with rhythms, with images, with colours.
Heard her boast, beast, a roast beef eater, daughter could spin, span, spick and spun the lowest form of wheat, straw into gold.
The train of thought was of wanting damaged language, and in the same way as sometimes the schizophrenic's language breaks down. And I suppose it came from that, of wanting the Skriker's language to be not entirely in control of its language, so that it constantly rhymes and associates and goes off on other trains of thought within a sentence.
Roar into roar, golden lion and lioness under the sea, dungeoness under the castle, for bad, mad, sad, adders and takers away. Never marry a king-size, well-beloved, chop, chip, pan, chap, finger, chirrup, cheer up, off with your making no headway.
One of the major themes of the play is damage on a very broad level, going from, kind of personal relationships that are damaged, language that is damaged, and running out politically from that.
in general, I think she's never a person who's been trapped by an ideology. She would call herself a feminist, she'd call herself a socialist, but I don't think you feel that she's locked into isms in the way that so many British playwrights have been in the last 30 or 40 years. There's a kind of intelligence, a discrimination, a flexibility, an openness of mind.
You feel all right?
You are a sweet girl. You are just such a sweet girl. Running away from home is a great start. I did it myself. It can get to be a habit. You keeping the baby?
Yeah, of course.
Because I'm looking for one. No, I'm kidding. Look at it. Floating in the dark with its pretty empty head upside down. Not knowing what's waiting for it. It's been so busy, doubling, and now it's just hovering. Nicely decorating itself with hair and toenails, but once it's born, it starts again, double, but this time the mind. Think of the energy in that. Maybe I could be the godmother.
You're staying in London?
Do you have friends in London?
No, but...
You now have one friend in London, and I have one friend in London, okay? Not okay?
Yeah, I do want to be friends. I just...
Anyone would think you were frightened of me. I'm frightened of you.
To a certain extent, Carol's text is complete in itself. The work I'm doing is, I suppose, helping to create another series of layers in the piece, which are often quite silent. And Carol has allowed this to happen by just writing, I suppose, a series of subplots that are going on continuously throughout the piece, and suggest this other world, I suppose, the world of fairies and the world of spirits.
I mean, I'm, as a theatre critic, and actually one with a very literary sort of background, do find myself quite nervous when I go and see things with very strong element of dance, and I suppose you could say performance art in them. I mean, are my critical faculties up to it? And I imagine a lot of my colleagues ask the same. It's something really we have to face, and there's a challenge we really have to accept. Now, I'm very glad there's someone like Carol Churchill around that helps me with that challenge, because the dance and all those other elements that one might find a little inaccessible are really ways through to her mind. A mind expressing itself through words, those words expanding to embrace dance, music, and all the rest of it.
Welcome home, sit, drink, drank, drunk, avocado and brawn, avocado and brawn, avocado and brawn, avocado and brawn, 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 black coffee, tea.
I don't think it's a thing of feeling that I want to abandon words entirely. I'm also interested in pushing words quite far as well. And I think I'd be just as likely to suddenly do a play with a lot of quite complicated text and no dance. I mean, it's not that I feel I'm abandoning words altogether.
Up you go, like dust in the sunlight of heart. Gobble, gobble, says the turkey, turnkey, key to my heart. Gobble-de-gook is after you. Ready or not, here we come. Quick or dead of the night, night. Sleep tight, heart.
Okay. Sorry, did you spot the male critic? Yes. I just love that. Are my critical faculties up to it? I want to say, no, they're not. So 2 key points I wanted to make about the Skriker. Firstly, as I flagged up about the form, the moving away from the Brechtian terrain to explore a physical language instead, this whole spirit world that Ian Spink and his dancers created. and to back up the notion of damage and damaged language, as you can hear in the voice of the Skriker performed there by Catherine Hunter. Hunter was trained by the physical theatre company Complicité. So it's this tiny, diminutive body, but as you can see, it can do all these marvellous kind of spider-like movements. It's this associative, schizophrenic kind of language. And what it augurs, I think, from the 1990s is Churchill's far more elliptical and poetic mode of theatre making that characterises her work in the 21st century landscape. But the second point, it's the notion of ecological damage that comes to the fore. This spirit world is the one that's damaged by a human world. So through that, she raises our human to the natural world relations, and in particular, the ecological damage that's caused by capitalism. And so when I've most recently been working on Churchill on something that's not as yet published, I've handed it over, but it's not out yet. I've been looking to really go back and look at the triangulation of socialist, feminist, and ecological politics in her work, and coming to the conclusion that it's that triangulation, that it's socialism, feminism, but it's also eco-socialist feminism. So ecology is increasingly wrapped into her commitment and advocacy of socialism and feminism, and finding ways to get that triangulation across to urge the need to change both socially, economically, and ecologically if we're ever to have a kind of sustainable future. Now, the fortunes of a socially progressive feminism remain rather bleak. That is until, as I flagged up previously in our sessions, the second decade of the 21st century. As the economic and class divides between us and them that Top Girls portrayed worsened, it did reach this kind of tipping point with the 2007 to 8 global banking crisis. And what we then got in the ensuing decade was an escalation of feminist activism and a revival of socialist feminist critiques of neoliberal capitalism. It got to the point where you've got to bring those critiques back. If critical theory let them go, actually now it's so critical, they have got to come back. And such was the impact I felt on British women playwrights around that time, that I had the confidence to write an article that was eventually published in Contemporary Theatre Review in 2018, to argue that there was a return to socialist feminism and a renewal on the part of feminist theatre to enter stage left. And I'm going to look briefly at that renewal by clustering 3 dimensions or aspects of feminist inquiry or critique. One is picking up still the neoliberal top girl from a critical position. Secondly, the worsening economic divide. And thirdly, ecological exploitation. And this is how I can now just sort of flag up 1 or 2 more names of the UK's contemporary women playwrights coming from younger generations than Churchill. So in terms of the neoliberal top girl, there was this revived concern with the idea, to contest the idea that women can have it all, the kind of the myth of the superwoman that Thatcher suggested we all believe in, the idea that equality has been achieved, and especially the erroneous notion that all women have the opportunity to have adventures like Marlene. So 2 examples in this cluster. The first is Lucy Kirkwood's NSFW is the title of the play, which stands for Not Safe for Work. That means material you shouldn't be caught looking at in the workplace. the Royal Court in 2012, and Penelope Skinner's Linda, also at the Royal Court in 2016. And both of these depict high-flying businesswomen in the sphere of commercial femininities. The boss of a women's magazine in NSW, and Top Girl Linda in the beauty industry. And I was thinking about this yesterday in Avanita's presentation. There was a line in one of the poems you shared with us yesterday. Let's hate beauty businesses. So there is a synergy between that and the feel of both these plays. So briefly, in NSFW, the top girl there is managing a women's magazine called Electra, and there's one image in that play that's always really stuck with me, a memorable image, which is there she is in her posh office talking down to a low male employee or would-be employee. And while she's talking to him, she's getting ready for an office party, and you have to go as your kind of favorite female character. And she's getting there, and while she's doing it, and she's got the dialogue, you can't actually see what she's dressing up to be. It's only when she's kind of finished, and you start to see this kind of Victorian-styled outfit coming out, and eventually this sash go around, and you realise that she's dressing up as a suffragette. And she has the line, "This is exactly what I asked for." So the collapse of the first wave of feminism with the suffragette movement is taken over by this idea that what it stood for is top girl, neoliberal top girl, so that the politics of the one are eclipsed by this contemporary call to the individualistic top girl. So that's the image that always stayed with me, is a very disturbing one from that play. And the second one from Penelope Skinner's Linda, that is done with, it kind of has lots of echoes of Shakespeare's King Lear, as it deals with the tragic downfall of Linda, an aging 50-something woman who rather erroneously believes she can revolutionize the beauty industry from within a patriarchal and capitalist status quo. And it fails totally because Linda has sold out to the beauty dream, which trades exclusively on the one thing that she no longer has, and that's youth. So both of these plays refute the idea of feminism fashioned as the high-achieving career woman, and hence renew the concerns that Churchill first raised in Top Girls about the risk to feminism when it's derailed by economic and social privilege. In the second cluster, the us and them economic divide, well, there were any number of plays by women dramatists dealing with the so-called age of austerity that was brought in by the banking crisis and its impact on underprivileged women's lives. So though that final line, or word rather, of Angie at the end of Top Girls, where it ends with just the word frightening, has become a reality for poorer classes of women and men struggling to cope. So the two examples here are, one is Britain Isn't Eating. Now that's one I'm not going to stop and we don't have time to watch this one now, but it's a 9-minute piece that you can check out online by the playwright Laura Wade. It's a microplay, short, and it was an interesting experiment because it's the Royal Court combined with the Guardian newspaper to research an urgent social issue, and then the playwright had a creative response to it and wrote a short play. So this one is about the crisis, the food bank crisis that we have in the UK. A food bank is where people make charitable donations of food to give to others for free because there's not enough food to go around. And the number of food banks in the UK is now, they can't meet the demand now. Even schools are having to spend their budgets on social care for the kids rather than educational care, including buying food for the kids that don't have enough. And there is this it's another kind of split subject that we've been talking about, because it has this politician who's brought back on a supposedly TV program, starred in a kind of bake-off thing that's all the rage in the UK. Terrible programs, but she's there and she's given a few like really poor ingredients, and she's told she's got to make a dinner with it. And of course, because she doesn't believe food banks are a necessary thing, she thinks that people are just getting freebies, free handouts that they don't really need. So it's a satire on all of that. So you get the politician one side, and most of the screening is that side. But the other side is where the same actress plays a silent figure that uses food banks. So it's the politician on one side, and then the poor woman who has no money for the food and sitting in a dimly lit room because there's not enough money for the electricity. So that's one you can check out online. And the last one under that class is Wish List by a very young writer, Catherine Soper. Wish List won an award as a debut play. That one opened at the Royal Exchange in Manchester up in the north, and it deals with the life of a poorly paid young woman in a kind of Amazon-styled warehouse, hence the title Wish List, you know, where you put a wish list on the Amazon sites. And she has the care of a brother who has mental health problems, so she tries to keep in this low-paid work as well as managing him. It is in the social realist tradition, it's back in that tradition, very much a class-conscious play. So in terms of the third cluster, just to illustrate this, I'm coming back to, this is where I'm thinking about ecology, feminism, socialism, and come back to a later play of Churchill's, that's Escaped Alone, at the Royal Court in 2016. Yeah, there's a note there to say you can check out headlines about all of those plays as well in the introduction to Feminism Then and Now, the one we had for day one. And that also brings up the number of practitioners, women practitioners, now looking at the ecology issue like Churchill is. But in terms of Escaped Alone, this was Churchill's return to having an all-female stage for a major play, where we've got 4 women in the cast, and they're all older women, cast for older women, kind of 70 and above, which made it very exceptional. And this generation of older women on stage seem like they sit in this sunny garden. They talk, the language is incredibly elliptical. It's all broken up, but there's enough to get these everyday conversations. And it feels like that their afterlives long lived in a world that's failed to transform socially and ecologically. They have each other for company. And there's a sense in which the Skriker's ecological clock from the earlier work is ticking louder than before, an overriding sense that time is running out to make a different choice to neoliberal capitalism as the harbinger and agent of social, economic and ecological disaster. But there's another split in this play, a schizophrenic split between the overbright, sunny backyard where the women there, they have their own personal anxieties that they're reflecting on, and then a black void in which one of the women monologues on world-ending apocalyptic disaster. So at this point it shows us Churchill firmly moving away from that Brechtian period and working in this condensed, elliptical, poetic mode of drama. And there's try to set up that double-eyed viewing there between the garden and the void, which you can see in the black with just the electric lights as a frame. So you go from the overbright garden, and the overbrightness is a clue in itself to not everything is well, and then the black void in which you get the monologues about a world, and they're reported, so it's like these apocalyptic disasters have already happened. So time is like running out, has it actually run out already? Is a kind of feeling question it raises. So in that split, there is this dislocation between the void and the garden, and it reveals how whatever the personal anxieties the women have, there's this kind of schism between those and then this bigger picture. Maybe a sense we can't grasp it. It's like we know it and yet we don't know it. So in those ways, she's registering a psychosocial breakdown between the personal and the political, which she observes as intensifying under neoliberal capitalism. But as dystopian as all of that sounds, and there is a dystopian feel for sure to this play, it's counterpointed by a sense of the women's human warmth. They're there, they keep each other company, they're taking care of each other. At one point they sing each other, and the instruction in the stage direction is important. They're not singing to the audience, they're not singing for us as spectators, they are singing to each other. And there's political anger too. The last monologue that Mrs. J, who's the one who has the responsibility of the monologues in the void, her final monologue, which is actually delivered in the garden, simply repeats the words terrible rage 25 times. So it's almost like you don't have the words to express the anger at the ecological destruction. So it's just this repeat 25 times. And in that anger, there's a resonance of a demand, a rageful demand for new, socially egalitarian and ecologically responsible system. So trying to bring these comments towards a close, couple of things to get us there. One is to note a couple of Top Girls revivals, recent ones. The first was one from 2019 at the National. The National previously, apart from the Skriker, which was performed there, has tended not to be a stage that's staged Churchill. It's always been the Royal Court that's her home. But recently they've gone for doing Churchill revivals, and this was one in 2019 of Top Girls. There is a recording of it, but it's on the Drama Online system, which requires institutional subscription to get to it, which is why I couldn't recommend it for viewing for this one. Because it was at the National, the National means that you have big budgets, high production values. So what they did with this was to have a huge cast and no doubling. And I found I missed it. I missed the political resonances that you get with the small cast and the doubling. But on the other hand, it did make for the work-based scenes, the agency scenes in the play, it increased the efficacy of those because you got the sense of all these women bustling around the stage competing for jobs. Bit Pina Bausch-like. You could have lots of the kind of women trailing around trying to get this work in this competitive environment. And there was an article that was published by the Evening Standard at the time in which a reporter managed to get together lots of the actresses who played in Top Girls over the years and give their views on it. And it was kind of like it came out as this sort of disappointing overview that things really haven't changed that much for women in that time. And I've included a few citations for you there about that. Not only have women's lives not changed, the other cluster of comments from that article were the way in which the theatre industry hasn't got that much better in terms of equality either. So both of those things. That image there, I should say, is the poster they use for the National Revival. So again, there is a sense, I think, in the way they image that the past is still in the present and we're still stuck with trying to work these things out, given that they've got a Pope Joan and Joel Gret on a London Underground tube. And the other one, the other revival, which I thought was more interesting, and this was at the Liverpool's Everyman Theatre, which is where the Trafford Tansy began. And this was from more recently still from 2023, and it was directed by a queer Asian director, Subha Das. And he managed to get Churchill's permission to make some changes to the cast and the play itself, small but significant ones. In terms of the casting, he got permission to make it inclusive and diverse, and it was the first major UK production to cast a black woman in the role of Marlene. And then in relation to that, he was allowed to change the setting. So when you've got the kitchen scenes, they're set in East Anglia, which is in a rural northeast, and he was allowed to change it so he could transfer it to Liverpool, where the theatre was, and to a poor suburb in Liverpool, Toxteth, which is where a lot of the racial riotings happened in 1981. So then you got a different resonance coming into the revival because of that. So it made for some interesting, some interesting dynamics to come out, because in terms of the agency scenes, then you had a sense that Marlene, played by a black actress, has this kind of the kind of lone black figure in an otherwise still white environment on the one hand, but then this sense when she's back with her family, and her family, Joyce and Angie, are all kind... Oh, I say we've got a dog again. Are all kind of... Sorry. These dogs are very fond of this course, I think. They're very always trying to come in on the act. In terms of the family and the diverse, ethnically diverse casting of the family, there's another critique going on there, because this is the family that the Top Girl syndrome leaves behind. So there were different resonances which did make it for a very interesting production. Much more interesting than the Nationals. It's being recorded. Right, so to get us into a bit of discussion now, I've got this manifesto, well, kind of. Back in 1960, Churchill wrote an essay, published in 1960, Not Ordinary, Not Safe, A Direction for Drama, ? Now, I wanted us all to think a little bit in terms of a manifesto, because I know some of you from theatre studies, some not, but hopefully everybody at some point spectates theatre. So maybe between us we can think about a manifesto for theatre, drawing on some comments that Churchill made in her original essay. Now, the original essay wasn't a manifesto, but it has a manifesto style to it. What she was doing was critiquing what she felt were like poor directions in British theatre back at the time she wrote the piece. And doing that, she starts to say what theatre should do. And keeping in mind, here's this young Carol Churchill about to, already a political animal and a theatre animal, commenting on what it should do. Now, it always astonishes me that she could come up with this vision back in 1960, before she'd even got going. But if I just draw your attention to, hopefully they're clear enough. So I put them in boxes. The key thing, playwrights don't give answers, they ask questions. Do you want to know how many times I sat that for an examination question to my students? Playwrights don't give answers, they ask questions. Discuss. We need to find new questions which may help us to answer the old ones or make them unimportant. This means new subjects, new forms. Subjects change not because the problems are solved, but because they become irrelevant. Subjects, so we start with subjects. Then she moves to form. Form changes too, something we've also noted, and I flagged up with Churchill. Doesn't stay the same in terms of form because the context shifts. So form changes too, not because heroic couplets are better or more true than blank verse, but because they suited the 18th century better. Form, context. Whenever conventions of subject and form outlast the impetus that formed them, they're felt to be inadequate to expressing life. Sometimes when we see a piece of theatre, we know it's not working. The form isn't working. The subject isn't working. It doesn't, as per the Sphinx test, make an impactful story. This one, for me, is always crucial. To tell us to care isn't enough. We have to be shown what we're to care about in a way that makes us care. It's no use saying care about the environment. Somehow, creatively, we have got to feel, see, feel, think, come out thinking, yes, right? But you can't do it like she says here, play is a poem. It's not a pamphlet. It's not a political pamphlet. Somehow we have to feel it if we're going to get involved in caring enough to want to change things. And then the overall power of concentration is essential to drama. The imaginative logic by which words are related in poetry is better suited than prose to drama, where the action is not a literal copy of life but an image, where action is used with the same poetic logic as words in a poem. So it has to be concentrated, it has to be imaginative, it can't be kind of literal, and it shouldn't be kind of prose wordy. And the final one, in drama there's a hope of reaching people, developing an awareness which will determine how we act. So the notion that theatre as an art form can be impactful, that it can resonate for us, that it can encourage us to see differently and to desire change. Now, in your discussions, keeping this in mind, and to think about those points, not just you can think about the relation to Top Girls, but also more generally as a manifesto for theatre, except I want you to add in your heads one more word in there throughout, and that's to say, feminist playwrights don't give answers, they ask questions. Feminist subjects change. Feminist forms change. Yeah? Put the word feminist or feminism in your heads with each of these, so that maybe it also helps us to think about things that are more specific to feminism, not just generally. Is that? Yes, I've got nodding heads. Right, groups. Off you go. So you can think about it in relation to Top Girls, you can think about more generally, but put the feminist word in there as well. Okay. I wonder if I could just... No, it's readable. Is it? It is. Maybe a little. Sure. Yeah, maybe because I haven't got my long distance bus. Read it fine. Yeah, I think. Yeah, but I'll get it. Yeah. Finish it tomorrow and send it all back. So I want to do it in the middle. Let's do it. Making us late for tea. Afternoon tea at this rate. Some quick sharing of thoughts. Yes, you did do it yesterday. Just any quick headlines.
One thing that we thought was that there should be a very conscious effort on the part of any feminist theatre to complicate the representation or the presentation. So there need to be more people on stage. Usually these days it's very convenient to have one or two people. So because inevitably with a lot of bodies, a lot of identities, a lot of presences will come in. Then the idea that there has to be a sort of a confluence of forms, like because there is a certain complacency that comes with sort of sticking to one form, and that shock that is needed might come in by using different forms within a production. And everydayness, like
oh yes,
the
everydayness that you wanted, a sense.
Yeah, would you like to sort of the idea of showing the sort of the minute or the very specific sort of experiences of the everyday, not so much in terms of representation, but in terms of what sort of how it is felt.
Sorry, how it is
felt, like
felt.
Yeah, like say in a space, entering in a classroom where, so maybe in terms of realism it has to be a classroom, desks, chair and all of it, but the experience of a woman entering a classroom which may not have those many women, or entering a classroom with the relief that there are thankfully enough
So
women.
does that relate to the point you're trying to make, that you would ideally feminist theatre want to have much more, if I summarize, much more of a presence, much more with not the reduced to a small 1, 2, but actually you'd like to see theatre, feminist theatre, working on a much bigger scale?
Yeah, not only that, but say even if it is showing, say, a classroom with a lot of men in it, but what would a female sort of body stepping into that classroom feel? Because usually it's just one discomfort, but there are so many. There is also ambition, there's the sort of excitement of participating in that class, representing, but there's also a body that is marked by certain identities that is different from other bodies.
Okay, so forming a collective in a classroom would have individual identities and intersectional issues
sort of
for individuals. So the collective isn't uniform. There are these everyday felt experiences to individuals that could build into a collective presence, but with a sense of the heterogeneity that got it. Okay, interesting. Anything else?
Like, as we were also talking about blind casting, so I am reminded of this example of a Shakespearean play where the guy fell in love with a girl and he chases her all the way only to find that it was a man. Means depiction of a means a man. It was this non-gender fluid model. No, before this heteronormativity was normalized. Means this kind of a play or example can be thought of if we are going towards a very feminist perception, at how gender roles, these gender binaries and marked bodies are fixed in a way and to debase this thing.
Okay, so ideally a feminist theatre should have, if we borrow that word from Jill Dolan, more fluid approaches to gender, so it gets out of a binarized model, is what you're arguing for, ideally. Yeah. Any other things that you raise that ideally feminist theatre, if we're thinking manifesto points, should do? Anything else you want to say that you would like to see it doing?
We also sort of discussed about how it shouldn't be preachy, so it should not be giving a lesson to
So
the
it shouldn't
people
just
in
be a
terms
pamphlet.
of to tell us to care isn't enough, but to show and not tell. So a lot of times there are a few pieces that tend to become very preachy and tend to give a very specific idea of how something is to be done. So to sort of steer clear from that understanding and to sort of build a collective idea of what it is to care or not care, or how do we move forward together. So I think that would be a feminist understanding.
It doesn't work to preach, does it?
No.
It doesn't work to preach.